Good evening. Welcome to the Rock Pile here tonight. Happy to be back behind the mic with another episode of the Beyond the Game podcast tonight with Karl Darden. We'll chat with him in just a little bit. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He's a 20-year veteran, a former helicopter pilot, and a chronic Navy sports fan. We're going to talk about his podcast, The Navy Sports Nation, which is the official site for all Navy sports. So we'll talk to him in a little bit. If you're just tuning in, make sure to give me a subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you're following me on social media. If you have any questions for the show tonight, just put them in the comment box. I'll try to pull over as many as I can. Excited to bring back the 46 Power podcast. We'll be talking nothing but college football, NFL football, high school football, and all football. I'll debut that episode. More than likely, I'll let you know this week. We're looking at next Monday night as well. So a lot going on. The Mohawk Valley Sports Watch will be back on the weekend with Coach Medicis, Coach Pags, and the Statman. So a lot going on here on the Rock Pile. So without further ado, let's bring on Karl. Let me just pull him up here. Let me just fix you, Karl. Let me get my screens up here. Let me move you here. And there you are. How are you, my friend?
All right. Good, Rocky. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited for this show, and I appreciate you working with me on the schedule. I know we were supposed to go last week, so I appreciate you working with me to get this thing going here tonight.
Oh, that's not a problem. Happy to do it.
So, Karl, let's talk a little bit about your background first. As I was just saying, a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Naval Academy, former helicopter pilot, chronic Navy sports fan, and then I want to get into how you started the Sports Podcast. Give us a little intro on yourself.
Okay, thanks. I graduated from Navy and with the class of '84. Ended up basically getting exposed to the Naval Academy when I was a freshman in high school, and kind of followed the route to get admitted. So everything worked out there. Went to flight school, as you mentioned. I was a helicopter pilot, and I was on active duty for 9 years, and flew a couple of different platforms. The last 2.5 years was the most fun, probably because I was an instructor down in Pensacola, Florida, and teaching the students to fly the H-57 Jet Ranger. They phased that out a little while ago, I'd say about 10 years ago, and they got a newer model now. But it was a really, really good time. It was probably the most fun I've ever had in the Navy. And then after 9 years, I decided to dip my toe into the corporate world. I did stay in the reserves, though. So I did the 11 years in the reserves for the total of 20. I didn't fly in the reserves. I was mostly attached to a unit that was working with air traffic controllers off different amphib ships and stuff like that. But still a really good time. Spent 19 years with Johnson & Johnson and finished that time up in 2016. And ended up being, I was doing an energy consulting business for a little while. And then I just basically am retired now. Semi-retired about 4 years ago. Fully retired basically 2 years ago. So I ended up starting this podcast about 4 years ago, and it was off the heels of the blog that I began in 2020 during COVID. The blog was called Navy Sports Nation, and then the podcast just seemed to be a natural follow-on from that. We did it a year later. It's called Navy Sports Central, which is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation. I know it's really not good marketing to use two different names for a podcast and a blog, but what the heck? I don't claim to be a marketing expert or anything like that. But anyway, I've been doing it for four years, and just really a lot of fun. It's strictly a hobby. I don't do it for money or anything like that. I just love talking about the Naval Academy athletes. not just in the revenue producing sports like football and basketball, but there are some incredible athletes on these sports that just kind of fly below the radar. And I like to highlight those guys and those girls as well, and those young men and women might, at any time I can. So um, that's that's what I do for fun. And like I said, 4 years and still going strong.
So when I was in high school, which was many, many, many years ago, I was at option quarterback, and my mom and dad, I would say more my mom than my father. I was recruited by Navy. I was recruited by Air Force. I was recruited by Army because,
Mhm.
of course, the option quarterback. My mom threw a lot of those letters out because my mom didn't want me to go into service. But when I look back now at my high school career, I would have been the perfect fit to go play at
Uh-huh.
any of the academy schools, just because of obviously the option game now today. But it seems like nowadays when you look at the NIL and you look at recruiting, um, it's so much different, right? Because when you sign up and you go play at one of these academies, and we can focus on Navy here, is when you graduate, right? You have to go into the service, right? That's part of the commitment.
Yes, yes, that is. And sometimes it varies a little bit, depending on what administration is in. They might make some allowances if somebody gets drafted or something like that. Like for instance, this year we had a defensive back named Rayon Lane who was a terrific safety, and he's also a special teams player. And he was, I can't remember if he got, I think he did get drafted. Either that or he's an undrafted free agent signed by, I believe, the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I think they're trying to work something out with him where they're saying, "Hey, look, go ahead and take your shot. If you make it, we'll just defer your service time, and you can do it later. Or if it doesn't work out, you can just go right back into the Marine Corps or the Navy." Most of the football players tend to go Marine Corps, and Ray may have done that. He might be Navy, I don't know, but yeah, it really kind of depends. But you're right. Typically, it's at least a 2-year commitment. Even way back when David Robinson graduated and he was drafted by the San Antonio Spurs, he did 2 years as in the civil engineering corps before they released him to play NBA ball full time. So
And I know you talk about some of the the football, basketball sports. There's a lot of good sports at Navy. What have been some of the fun sports and non-football related in basketball that you've covered and you've talked about?
well, I tell you what, and these are the ones that tend to do a little bit better on my podcast because you don't hear from them, you don't hear about them all that much. So what ends up happening is, especially if I have a guest on, right? We'll do the podcast and everything, and they'll send it out to their folks. And next thing you know, like the rowing is a great example. All right, I got a couple of classmates who, when we were seniors, they were on the heavyweight rowing team that won the national championship, and I interviewed them. Basically, it was back in January, and one of them was the team captain, and the other guy occupied the stroke seat, which is like the seat that establishes the pace for the entire boat. We must have talked for an hour and 40 minutes, right? and and when that one hit, when I released that one, they sent it out to all their rowing friends, and there's this really tight rowing community, and it just kind of blew up. So I enjoy talking about rowing. I got a rowing machine myself, and I always ask people for tips and stuff on different workouts and everything. So rowing is one. um, Women's lacrosse is another one, and that was one that I've had the same. One of my guests that I like to bring back, she played at Navy when it was still a club sport. Now it was a national level club sport because they won a couple of national championships on that stage, but it didn't become a varsity sport at Navy until 2007. But she is really, really knowledgeable. In fact, she's a high school lacrosse coach. So whenever something big happens with women's lacrosse, I always invite her on. In fact, my very last podcast, I was counting down the top 10 most memorable moments in Navy sports for this sports season. And the number one moment I selected was when Navy women's lacrosse beat Loyola to qualify for the NCAA tournament, because Loyola is a monster program in women's lacrosse in the Patriot
Hmm.
League. And they've been in the league, basically 11 years, and they have not lost a single regular season conference game ever. They're 93-0. And the only team that's beaten them during that whole time they've been in the league has been Navy, but it's always been in the Patriot League tournament or in the NCAA tournament. So this year they beat them in overtime to qualify. Loyola also made it to the tournament as well, just as an at-large. but it was quite an exciting game. It was televised on CBS Sports Network, and it was just fantastic. So, yeah, rowing, women's lacrosse, some of the others I've talked, men's and women's swimming is another one I'd like to highlight as much as I can. The women's tennis program is big. Uh, let's see, what are some of the other? Those are probably the big ones. I've talked about the rifle team as well. That's actually a co-ed varsity sport, and a few others. But yeah, those ones that fly below the radar tend to be pretty popular.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I mean, I cover the big sports. I cover football, basketball, and baseball, but locally, I've covered field hockey, I've covered soccer, I've covered bowling and some other sports as well. Lacrosse, I think, has gotten bigger and bigger. I'm close to Syracuse, so
Hmm.
Syracuse lacrosse is really big this way,
Oh,
and I
for
know
sure.
Navy, the men's have a fantastic lacrosse team too. You
Hmm.
just kinda touched on this with some of the sports that you've highlighted. Has there been a big game that you've covered with Navy that stands out to you in any of the podcasts that you've done?
Well, certainly this last one with the women's team beating Loyola was huge. And I think that the reason that was so big, again, I already spoke to Loyola's record, but I think what really added to the storyline was the last couple of times that Navy has played Loyola. In last year's Patriot League championship game, they lost in overtime. It was just such a tough defeat because they were battling with them just all the way down to the end. Score was tied at the end of regulation, and then Loyola was able to put one past the goalie, and that was it. And then in the regular season this year, they played them in Annapolis. So I'm thinking, okay, this is where I think they can take them down during the regular season, and they lost in double overtime. So it was just so painful. So this championship game that was just played, a couple of months ago, that put a really huge spotlight on it. And I think that at least in recent memory for your, if you're talking about the sports that aren't the real huge ones in terms of generating the money, that was probably the biggest one. If you're talking about some other sports, like say on the men's side, probably wrestling is one that they took down. Lehigh's got a really big program
Yep.
in the league, and they beat Lehigh. And this is when Navy's the wrestling coach. It was just like in his first year, as a matter of fact. This guy's name is Kerry Colott. Just a monster career in college, and he wrestled He ended up graduating from a small school in Pennsylvania. But this guy is the perfect coach for Navy wrestling, and he's just got this attitude that you don't need all the fancy facilities and all that kind of stuff. He had a podcast with a pretty big following of his own. And he did this piece one time when he was still wrestling. They went down to Cuba to wrestle their guys. And Cuba has a really, really good wrestling program. And you look in their gyms and it looks like, one of these boxing gyms back from like the 1950s, rust on all the weights, mats that have been around forever. But these guys are just first rate wrestlers. And that, his point being that, look, facilities are great, but what it comes down to is a guy on the mat, and that's how he trains his wrestlers. That's a culture he's established at Navy. And so, yeah, when they beat Lehigh, and not just beat him, they beat him pretty handily his first year as coach. That was a really big deal.
Carl, one of the things everybody always talks about, and even some of the announcers on TV, and anytime you listen and watch any of the academy schools, they talk about the athlete itself and the difference between an athlete at the academy. And again, we can focus on Navy here, or let's say an athlete at a Michigan or Ohio State. And they always talk about you don't ever want to play at academy school because of the
Hmm.
toughness. They're smart, they're disciplined, they don't make a lot of mistakes. Talk to about us about some of the difference between an academy athlete maybe versus some of those other big Power 5 schools.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that when you think about the type of recruit that comes in, uh, this is all about spotting potential, right? Because I mean, Navy is never going to get a 5-star athlete. They're probably never going to get a 4-star athlete. They can get a 3-star athlete and develop them to a 4, probably. It's happened before, and I'll cite a couple of
Mhm.
examples. But yeah, they're looking for that strong 2-star, really good 3-star athlete that's just got, first of all, they got to be able to understand what the mission of the academy is basically to train naval and marine corps officers, right? And certainly the the answer that I hear from most of the football players when they're interviewed and say, hey, well, why did you come to Navy? And they said, well, I wanted to serve my country, but I still wanted to play competitive Division I football. that
Hmm.
that is the difference. I mean, the other folks, more power to them. Their goal is to play Division I football and, more than, if possible, get to the NFL. When that's not really what's on the Naval Academy athlete's mind. They just want to play good competitive football, and they'll do whatever it takes to get on the field. And I've said this before to other folks I've talked to. When they go to the practices and playing the games and stuff like that, that's that's the easiest thing they do, all week, right? Because of all their other commitments. I mean, they have, no joke, 20, I would say minimum 17 to 18 credit hours per semester. And junior year, forget it, it's probably going to be closer to 20. And you have professional commitments that you have besides that, lectures to go to at night. When I was there, they gave exams at night. Not sure if they do that anymore, but let's just say you're being pulled from a bunch of different directions. And the time that they get on the practice field is probably like their sanctuary. And they go and, they, they're 100% focused on what they're doing when they're on the field. They have to be. Otherwise, things start going sideways. But that's probably the main difference. These are just, students that really strong student athletes that we want to compete versus, other recruits that go to colleges and so forth that may or may not finish, and that's the choice that they make. But at the Naval Academy, they have no choice but to finish. Finish in 4 years, or that's basically it. And the nice thing is the coaching staff understands what the mission is. They understand the type of athlete they're looking for. A lot of coaches love coaching here because it is a developmental program. It's not fishing people out of the transfer portal and, hoping that you get the right mix to make a run at a national championship. I mean, no disrespect to Ohio State, but they had a huge NIL budget. And I will say that the one guy that they had on their roster was a kid named Denzel Burke, who actually, when he was in grade school, went to
Yep.
school with my son. And so we've been following him ever since he got there. But he was a high school recruit, started his freshman year, played all the way through, stayed with Ohio State the whole time, didn't mess with the portal, none of that stuff. But he's an exception to the rule. These days, it's just not that way. And I think when people come to coach at Navy or when they come to play at Navy, that's one distraction that is not present. And I mean, I guess it isn't away from a player standpoint, but certainly not from the coaches. I mean, they understand that when they recruit a player, they're there to try and develop them as best as they can. And ultimately, we've had some players, we had our share of players going to the transfer portal, but none of the
Yep.
ones that I wouldn't say there's one that did. Chad Hodges, he went to the transfer portal. He's a linebacker, and he ended up playing at TCU and did end up playing in the national championship game when they got waxed by who was it? Was it Georgia that beat TCU that badly that year? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
pretty bad.
but Chad Hodges was about the only guy that I recall that went to the transfer portal from Navy and still got appreciable playing time. In fact, he started, but most of the others, they just kind of disappear and you just never see them again. So I think that players that come to Navy know that if they want to play Division I football, their best bet is to stick with the program. So
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Denzel Burke because in my family, we're Big Ten family here. My wife and I met in Columbus, Ohio. So she drank the Gatorade and is a big time Ohio State fan. I am a
oh my
Michigan
God.
fan.
I didn't
So
think that
her
was
and I
allowed.
really don't talk much. It's a house divided for sure. We got the flag and everything, but we don't talk to each other much in the
Right.
fall. She had bragging rights this year because they won the national championship, but I can say we beat you the last 4 years, and we won it the year
Right.
before. So we got that Ohio State Michigan ties here. But the other thing that always comes up, and I always find it fascinating too, and you kind of lived it, and I'm sure you've talked to some of the athletes. When you go to Navy, you got to go to
Mhm.
class, but that schedule and that routine from what the schedule looks like in the morning until late at night, and then you got to factor in practice. Like you said, practice is probably the easiest thing that they'll do the entire day. But can you outline maybe what a typical day looks like for an athlete?
Yeah, I mean, The way the day is pretty much set up, you wake up, and sometimes, depending on the time of year, they might have some workout to do even before they go to class, right? It might be just a quick weight training workout or something like that. But you go down, you eat breakfast. If you well, you have formation, you eat breakfast, and then you have four classes. Four class periods before lunch. Just one, two, three, four. They may not have a class every single period, but I would say at least three, if not all four. And then you come back, you have lunch at noon. They typically eat with their team at noontime, and then they finish up with the afternoon classes, which is usually two more class periods. And then they go to the practice. They finish up that, and they eat dinner with their team, and then the study hours, like basically 3 hours, 8 to 11 o'clock. And then after that, if they want to keep studying, I guess they can. But people, I mean, the mids, take it from me, really value their sleep. I mean, I I could fall asleep at any time in any position when I was there. I did not need a rack. All right, I mean, I could just fall down and just sleep sitting down in a chair. Some people couldn't even tell that I was asleep until they came looking real close and saw that my eyes were closed. So, but yeah, that's a typical day. It just every day, every minute is really accounted for. There's really not a whole lot of time, especially if you're a freshman. There's not a whole lot of time to sit back and just kind of kick back or anything like that. But yeah, that's basically. And then back they don't have Saturday classes anymore, but they used to. You'd have Saturday classes just until noon, and it'd be like one, maybe two. But they don't have that anymore. But yeah, it's pretty jammed up. There's not a whole lot of free time given the number of credit hours they have to take, and that's why things are they're pretty much on the go the whole time.
What's it like for you to go back? I don't know if you get to any of the sporting events, not just football, but it could be any of the sporting events at Navy. What's it like for you as a Navy graduate to go back and still be part of it?
I love it. I try to get back. I live in Phoenix, by the way, and I try to get back every, say 18 months or so. And that is sometimes for the express purposes of seeing a game. Like a year ago, April, I went because uh, I just caught a weekend where there's a lot happening. Army was playing Navy and women's lacrosse at home. Uh, the Navy rugby team, which by the way won a national championship a couple years ago, they were playing in their first round of their playoff game, so I wanted to see that. So my wife and I took the trip back, and we went to the rugby game, we went to the lacrosse game, and it is great. I will tell you, the lacrosse game was amazing because there was just thousands of people in the stands, which was a really something for women's lacrosse. I mean,
Yeah.
that sport is really taking hold in the East Coast, on the East Coast, and I just really enjoyed the atmosphere. And to me, it's just really cool to see a lot of so much support for some of these sports that, like I said, typically don't get a lot of airtime all the time. uh, when I went back for my reunion back in October, I didn't get a chance to make it, but one of my buddies actually went to the cross country meet because they're competing against Army and cross country that very same weekend. So he was able to tell me about that. um, but that whole environment, I think, is just something special. And especially being a graduate and being a part of that. I was not a varsity athlete when I was in school. I was too busy I made a business decision to, to make sure I could graduate. But it was, it was great when I was there as a mid. It's even better now. It's just, especially when you see sports like football kind of rebounding a little bit after several flat years. Just the level of enthusiasm and the support is pretty exciting, not just within the academy itself, but also the city of Annapolis.
Well, I was just gonna say a lot of people have told me that on Saturdays, a nice fall day, there's nothing better than that campus. How special is that campus in the fall?
It's something else. The fall and the October is probably the best time to visit there because you got nice crisp weather. It's just fabulous. I mean, just sunshine everywhere. The leaves are turning, and just like I said, the level of excitement. This past October with my reunion, we were playing. It was Charlotte. Charlotte's not the best team in the American Conference, but we played them the year before and just barely squeaked by. It was mostly a defensive win, so we didn't really know what to expect. But the atmosphere was just incredible, and everybody was super excited about it. The weather was perfect, and I was actually doing my podcast, kind of like an on the scene sort of thing, just interviewing different classmates and stuff, asking them some of their favorite moments in Navy sports. And we blinked, and before you knew it, the score is like 21-0. Just a lot of really exciting offensive displays there. And we had one guy, Deshaun Peel, he had two pick sixes, and one of them I think he actually finished off the scoring, and it went for like 84 yards or something like that. So, yeah, pretty exciting stuff.
I know a lot of teams, and I have a lot of buddies that are coaches in college football, big time college football that have played against Navy, and a lot of them say it's so hard in practice to simulate what that triple option really looks like. And it's like you get into a game, and I'll never forget this. I was living in Columbus. Navy took Ohio State to the wire late in the fourth quarter. I think Ohio State scored late in that game, and Navy had a chance, and I think it was an incomplete pass at the end of the game. But everybody was like, that was one of the toughest games Ohio State played all year, and they all say the same thing. When you see Navy or you see Army or you see Air Force on the schedule, you better be ready to strap it up because it's going to be a full four-quarter game. It's so hard to simulate that triple option in
You're
practice.
right. I mean, it's tough to simulate that speed, right? I mean, that's the trickiest part. And I know the game that you're talking about because Navy had scored to close to 2 points, and they were going for a 2-point conversion, and it was intercepted
Yes.
and it was run back. So Ohio State ended up winning by 4. That was when I can't remember what year it was, but it was when Keenan Reynolds was, I believe, a junior. If it was a junior,
Yeah, he was a
yeah, I
stud.
mean, he was something else. And since then, the triple option basically is still uh, a part of Navy's base offensive package. But about 2 years ago, well, actually, it was a year ago that Navy hired a new offensive coordinator, um, and he came in and he brought in, his name is Coach Cronick, and he brought in
Yep.
the hybrid wing T is what they call it. And it was kind of the wing T is a very, very old offense. But he made so many changes. He grew up with it, and he made so many different changes and modifications that kind of brought it into the 21st century, so to speak, where it incorporates a lot more passing. If you go back and look at the Army Navy game, you'd be surprised at how much Navy threw the ball, and it was really quite something when you saw Coach Cronick's game plan and everything. But it's still an option, right? I mean, you still have to basically make your reads and so forth. And the idea of an option is just to get on the unbalanced side of the field and make that defensive player make a decision. And once that decision is made, then you need to have one way to go that they haven't accounted for. And it was just a masterful game plan that Coach Cronick called against Army, and pretty much the whole year went like that. There's only one game where, well, actually 2 games where we were truly embarrassed, and that was against Notre Dame and against Tulane. Notre Dame, Navy just wound up in quicksand and couldn't get themselves out. And then Tulane, I think what happened was, well, our starting quarterback was he got knocked out of the game with some back spasms, and the kid that backed him up just didn't have the same chemistry and everything. And it was, it was a tough game, but they finished 10-3 on the year, which a great win over Army, which is considered an upset because Army did win the conference. And I still have that game on. I still have that game recorded on my DVR, and then they won their bowl game against Oklahoma, which they had to come from behind to do that. And old Navy teams that ran the option were not known for coming from behind, but with this hybrid wing T, it's much more balance out there, and they were able to fight their way back and end up pulling out the win, 21-20.
And I know you mentioned that, when you were back, or a friend of yours went to a cross country meet, and they were in Army. Again, my family, huge college football fans, and I always say the best game in college football, the biggest rivalries, Michigan, Ohio State. They call it the game. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people say America's game is Army and Navy. Talk to us how special that rivalry is, not just in football, but just in general at Navy. Is what's it mean? Um, when you guys play Army in any sport.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I do want to speak to and basically amplify on some of your remarks between, when it comes to Ohio State, Michigan, which I do agree with. When you talk about ranking rivalries, if you look at the rivalries that I hesitate to use the word relevant because that would imply that Army and Navy is irrelevant. But I think a better choice are the ones that have national impact.
Mhm.
Okay, especially when it comes to college football playoff and stuff like that. There's no arguing that Michigan Ohio State is the number one rivalry. Okay, you could probably go through the years going back to like the 1950s, and you can start marking. Okay, this whoever won this Rose Bowl's on the line, potential national championship, and then you go into the playoff, same sort of thing, right? Army and Navy doesn't have that sort of cachet, I guess, but I will make the argument that Army and Navy is the most, and I'll use the word storied rivalry in college athletics because of just the the atmosphere that surrounds it, right? I mean, there's guys on the field competing that ended up going to war and became war heroes, or they were killed in action, or something like that. Um, and that to me, and there's just some incredible stories. If you probably, I don't know if you've read any of John Feinstein's books, but he's got
Mhm.
some incredible stories about some of the folks that played in the Army Navy game. And to me, that's what makes it so special, is because you have that pomp and circumstances, about pomp and circumstance of the march on, with the Corps cadets and the Brigade of Midshipmen. You have the the coin toss, where you have somebody from the administration out there, flipping the coin and everything, and just the flyovers, all that kind of stuff. There's just so much that goes into it. And I think that, especially when you look at the stories that surround some of these players, especially going back 40, 50, 60 years, it's pretty amazing. And sometimes it just kind of makes your kind of raises goosebumps on you, because it is so special. And then there's the quality of the games themselves. I mean, we've had Navy's won a couple of times recently where they were considered upsets. Army won a couple of years ago on a fumble at the goal line, which if the
Yep.
Mids could have held on to it, they would have been probably another upset there. But yeah, the way some of these games finish are just amazing. Navy's got a 14-game winning streak, a 14-year winning streak at one point, from 2002 to 2015, we'll call it. And there's just a lot of stories there. That's for sure.
And I respect that, because when you watch that game and, like, you got Auburn, Alabama, you got North Carolina and Duke in basketball, where they hate each other, right? They jaw at each other the whole game, and it's like when you watch Army Navy play, it's just 4 quarters of really physical football, and then at the end of the game, when both teams line up, you see them hugging each other. It's like these guys are going to go to battle when their career is over, and they're going to be representing our country. And I think that whole atmosphere, if you watch that game and you don't get chills watching it, you're not human, because I say that is the game
Yeah.
in sports, and it just has a different meaning when you watch it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And I'll ask you to do, one thing, after the show is over and everything. If you go to YouTube and you pull up the 2019, you can just type in the search 2019 Army Navy game teaser. Okay. And this is like the intro to the Army Navy game the CBS Sports puts together every year. And every year they tend to outdo themselves. But without a doubt, the best one I saw was from that 2019 game. And it just took several clips from a speech that President Kennedy made when he was addressing the class of 63 when they graduated. And I tell you what, you listen to that and you don't, get a leaky eyeball, you're
Mhm.
you're not human. That's all I can say. But and then of course Navy won the game, thank God, because I wouldn't want to associate such a great intro with a loss. But it was it was really, really something. And it speaks exactly to what you're saying. I mean, that's just the feeling that people get watching the game. And then, of course, like you said, when the players are finished, competing against each other, they serve together, and that's something you don't see anywhere else. So
And as Carl, you and I were talking before we came on briefly, is a friend of mine, Justin Davis, who was a linebacker coach there for Coach Ken for a while, and then he actually got out of coaching because he wanted to start a family. And in the coaching world at that level, you don't have much time for family time. You're on the
yeah,
road recruiting and all that. But Coach Ken, and I'll say this, is the last couple years from 2020 to 22 were a couple down years for him, but the impact that he had on that school, not just a football program, but the entire university itself. How much did he mean to that school?
Well, I tell you what, that was probably one of the best hires that the outgoing athletic director made. Chuck Gladchuck just retired recently, but he first of all he hired Coach Johnson back in 2002 to just basically get the program back on the right track,
Yep.
and Coach Johnson did a terrific job with that. And I mean, we were lucky to hold on to him for 5, 7 years or whatever it was. But I just knew, yeah, it was 7 years. But I just knew that he was not long for Annapolis. He wanted to go to coach at the next level, and sure enough, when he went to Georgia Tech, I could. The only thing I said was, "Man, I hope Gladchuck, hires Niumatalolo because you got to have continuity in a program like this." And sure enough, that's what he did. So for all those years, um, it was just nice. Everybody knew what they were getting into when they came to play at Navy. It was a triple option offense. It was at the time the defense wasn't the greatest, but when he hired the new defensive coordinator, Coach Brian Newberry, back in prior to the 2019 season, that flipped everything. And now, to tell you the truth, during those years where Navy was struggling, it was a defense that was carrying to any win that they got. It was a defense
Mhm.
that was carrying them to those wins until the offense could finally get themselves on track again. And now you have what I think is the best of both worlds, because you have a defense that is disruptive, they're opportunistic, they are extremely physical, and you put that together in an offense that's creative, just really, really deceptive, and I mean they can beat you a number of different ways. So I think that this past year, that 10-3 record really reflected that. And I think, my hope is that if the injury bug stays away, that we can, that the Mids can repeat, that same type of season.
And you talked about Coach Newberry, who was his seventh year at Navy's third as the head coach, and you mentioned last past season 10 wins. I think it's a six time in school history that they won 10 games in a season. What's the impact he's had just in his year three as the head coach?
I think that, and this is another. I mean, it was a great hire by Coach Niumatalolo, because I felt like by the time, when I guess Gladchuck made the decision to move on from Coach Ken, which really broke my heart. I didn't really want to see that.
Same here.
But that being said, uh, he made the right move to hire Coach Newberry. I mean, I think that he'd earned the position, and I just felt like, well, we just need to find somebody to pick the offense back up, and the team should be back on its feet in another couple of years. And the first year didn't go that great, because the offensive coordinator just was not a good fit for the Naval Academy. I mean, I think that, and I could tell this too, because I would watch all the press conferences and stuff, and I found this out later because I knew I had interviewed the quarterback's mom a couple of times, and she had communicated with me after the fact that, yeah, this guy, it was a tough locker room, because he didn't understand, he couldn't adapt his coaching style to the Mids schedule. And he didn't understand how, well, you only have him for 2 hours, that's it. Okay, so figure it out, and he couldn't do it. And it got so frustrating, and I think at some point he might have lost the locker room. And so yeah, Coach Newberry had to make a move. And then the guy that he ended up hiring, Coach Cronick, I mean, he's the one that he wanted in the first place, but he couldn't entice him enough. And I think, I think the next year he wasn't taking no for an answer. So he went to Gladchuck and said, "Hey, we need to, do what we need to do to get this guy. Otherwise, I can't make any promises in terms of what the offense is going to be." And Cronick he overperformed. I mean, talk about exceeding expectations. I mean, my God.
In that American Conference too, last year, you were talking about Tulane, but Army won 12 games, Tulane won 9 games, Memphis won 11 games, East Carolina won, I think, 7 or 8, South
Hmm.
Florida won 7, and South Florida is going to be better this year than what I think people are going to give them credit for. But that conference over the last 2 or 3 years has gotten so much better, and some of those top teams, they're putting 6, 7 teams in bowl games now every year.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I think this past year it was 8, and they finished 6-2. So, not too shabby there. And I think that, they always have somebody. I mean, they had a few that moved on to over the conferences, like for instance, Central Florida. But remember, a couple of years, one year, Central Florida went undefeated,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure if they made the I don't think they made the college football playoff that year. No, they didn't. Um, but yeah, they'll always have a team that's threatening to break into that college football playoff. And now, of course, with 12 teams, it's going to be a little bit easier to make that happen. So we'll see. Now, a lot of people are talking about, is Navy good enough to make the CFP this year? I said, well, I don't want to get into all that. Okay. Let me just tell you what my goals are as a Navy fan, right? I mean, I look at their schedule and I'm not one to make predictions or anything like that, but the goals are, beat Army, win the Commander in Chief's trophy, which means beat Air Force 2. All right. And then if they can snag about, 8 or 9 wins, that's great. Get to a bowl game and potentially win that. That's it. I mean, and I don't really get all caught up in the hype of this, like, because a lot of people were talking them up this past year because they're undefeated, 6 games into the season. But, the people who really follow Navy football understand what kind of program it is and what kind of team it is. They will always be a team that is going to be borderline top 15 to top 25, right in that range. That's a good solid program for them. That's a good season for them. And who knows? Maybe they catch lightning in a bottle one year. The college football playoff is 12 teams now. Maybe they get that 12th team, but guess what? They got to play one of the top seeded teams, and that might not be too pretty. But you never know. And like I said, I think that I like to see them, play these top programs, and invariably they will come away with a win every. I mean, I think they've probably beaten a top 25 team more. Last year they did, because it was Memphis, and then they UCF a couple of times. They beat them 2 years in a row when they were ranked. The biggest win was probably against Houston about 10 years ago. Houston came in ranked 6th. Navy was coming off a loss to Air Force, which is very disappointing, but they ended up knocking off Houston, and that was probably their highest. Yeah, that was the highest ranked win since even about the time I graduated. They knocked off South Carolina, that was ranked 2nd at the time. I still am trying to figure out how they won that game. I actually watched a video of it on YouTube one time. It was, I think the Gamecocks just dressed out a bunch of their fans as players because Navy just ran them right off the field.
I think the one year you're talking about when UCF won, they finished 12-0. They didn't have the playoffs then, and Scott Frost was the head coach. And I remember at the end of the season, UCF celebrated and put a banner up at the school that they won the national championship, because at that time, obviously, they didn't have the playoff and they didn't get selected to play in one of the big. I think at that time it was one of the BCS games.
Right.
So you answered my question on expectations for this coming season, and I think it's realistic. I think last year. At one point in time, they were saying what non-Power 5 team, now they call it the Power 4, outside of the top 25 has a chance to get into the playoff. And I remember they mentioned Navy, they had mentioned Army because they were both undefeated. They were on a collision course. And I think now with that 12-team playoff, I think a lot of years you would say, well, Navy or Army is probably not going to, or even Air Force is probably not going to make a BCS playoff game as a top 4. But now with that 12 teams, like you said, if you get hot at the right time, they can squeak out maybe a 10-1, 10-2, or there's a realistic chance now for Navy and these teams to get in.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot would have to go just about perfect. I don't think they could afford to lose more than one game, to your point. I think that your call was right on there. 10-1, maybe two losses, depending on what that second one is. But they'd almost certainly have to win the conference. And then after that, it's just up to the folks in the selection committee. But like I said, I mean, to me, that would be fantastic. But, I'm not going to lose any sleep if Navy doesn't get into the college football playoff. I do tend to lose a ton of sleep if they lose to Army, believe me.
I'm sure you and a lot of the alum would be the same way for if that game if it doesn't go your way.
Right.
So, Carl,
right.
the last thing I want to ask you, and I appreciate you jumping on with me tonight. I said we were going to go a half hour. We went a little bit longer than that. What's next for you? When can we expect a podcast episode to come out? How can we follow you throughout the season and even beyond football season?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking. Navy Sports Central is my podcast, and I'm, not a whole lot going on in the summer right now. I was thinking about maybe using the opportunity to pull up, maybe reach out to one of the coaches that we don't hear too much about. Like, for instance, this past year we had a couple of guys that won the doubles national championship in squash of all sports, right? And I thought that'd be kind of cool. I've not talked about squash yet. Maybe we do that. But specifically, I will be doing a football preview probably in about a month, right before the season starts, and I'll probably have. I'm going to try and get a couple of my classmates on who were the team captains when we were there, to kind of sum up how the fall practices have gone. I mean, how the summer practices have gone, and going into the fall. I think we open up with VMI, and then I think after that we have a conference game against University of Alabama Birmingham, and then we get into the rest of the schedule. But yeah, so Navy Sports Central. I'm probably going to look to record something in about a month that's football related, and hopefully I'll be able to stick to that once every 2 to 3 weeks time frame that I've had in the past. So, and you can follow me on Instagram. This is Karl D Navy 84, and I think I do have a Navy Sports Nation handle as well. So either one of those two, those are the main two places. On Facebook, by the way, and you don't have to be a Navy grad or anything like that. If you want to jump on, you can. But the Navy Sports Nation is a private group. But you don't, like I said, you can be just a fan of Navy if you just kind of want to follow some of their sports. I tend to post there fairly regularly, and all you got to do is type that into the search, Navy Sports Nation, answer a couple of questions to jump in. And we've got over 1,000 people. I'm not saying they're all active, but we do get quite a bit of nice engagement on that when it comes to the different sports, whether it's football, track and field, whatever's in season.
Well, Carl, listen, I'll definitely follow you. And if when you talk some college football, if you need a co-host, you need a guest to come on and talk college football, let me know. I'd be more than happy to come on and chat with you. But I hope you had fun. I had a great time chatting with you, learning a little bit more about you. And I've been a big Navy and Academy fan for a long time. I always pull for all the academies, and they're fun to watch. So I really appreciate you taking the time tonight.
All right, thanks, Rocky. I appreciate you asking, and happy to come back anytime. And I think this is a really good synergistic fit too, because it's with your depth of knowledge in college football. I think we do need to look for an opportunity to do some reciprocity here. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Might be a great way to kick off the season for Navy.
Sounds good. Let me know. I appreciate it, Carl. Thanks for keeping in touch.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, man. So that was Karl Darden. Great guest. I've always been fascinated with the academies, and not even just for a college football fan, but just in sports in general. So give Karl a follow. I'll make sure I post his blog on my page as well. Thanks for following me tonight on this podcast. I will post the first episode of the 46 Power podcast, which is everything football. So it could be high school, college, NFL. We got high school football around the corner, so I'll be bringing on the local coaches like I always do, talking about the upcoming season. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch. It's not going away. I've just been busy running around with my kids on weekends and throughout the week with sports, so I'm not going anywhere. More to come. So I appreciate you following tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. As I say on the rock pile is where dreams become